Hi everybody, my name is Heather Perry, Superintendent of Schools in Gorham, and welcome to the fourth in a series of 4 videos around trying to get to know our public schools and trying to understand better public schools in Gorham. This is our 4th video. We've had many different topics, but this one is focused on the future of public schools in the community of Gorham. And I have a very special community guest with us here today, Andrew Dolliff. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Heather. Pleasure to be here. Andrew Dolliff. I'm actually the superintendent of schools in Yarmouth, just up the road. But I live here in Gorham and have lived here since 1996, actually. My children went through the Gorham schools, did an excellent job. They're all out living successful adult lives at this point and no longer on our payroll, so to speak.
That's good.
So you guys did a good job with them, and it's a pleasure for me to be here.
Excellent, excellent. So, you know, there's 2 superintendents talking with one another about the future of public schools. This could get a little geeky. We'll see what happens with that. But I know that you've come up with a couple of questions that you'd like to start with, so why don't you go ahead and fire off and see where we go.
This would be a good way to put people in the community to sleep, right? Listening to a couple superintendents talk about schools. But
probably.
But, you know, I thought we'd start off, you know, and try not to pull any punches. It's been a couple of tough years in Gorham, and as it has been in many places around Greater Portland, in terms of the budget, getting budgets approved and trying to keep things in line. And, you know, and we hear that often in public finance. But, you know, for Gorham in particular, talk about the drivers that have forced you to ask the taxpayers for some fairly significant increases over the past couple of years.
Yeah, you know, I think that there's a lot of different drivers, and I think, again, public schools all across the Cumberland County area, at least in the southern part of the state, I think you've really seen many of these drivers as well. I don't think they're unique to Gorham per se. I think what is unique to Gorham is the resources that we have to deal with these kinds of increasing costs. But the increasing costs that I see for the Gorham schools, really big one, special education. That's a huge one. We've seen an increase in our special ed population. Since I was here in 2015 to now, we've gone from about a little over 300 students in special education. We're now well up over 500 students in special education services here in the community of Gorham. And when you talk about, I know this is kind of geeky out again, but you know, per pupil costs in Gorham, last year $17,000. If I calculate that for special education students, though, that's about $18,600. So for every special education student, you're spending about $1,600 more per student on those expenditures. So you see that increasing population over time. That's a significant dollars over the course of time. And we've also seen increasing needs in those areas. It's not just about the numbers of students, but also the significant increase in needs. We've seen far more out-of-district placements, which are far more expensive. So I think that's one big thing. I think another big cost for Gorham that may be a little bit more unique to Gorham, but I don't know, I think some other systems are experiencing this as well, is around our facilities costs and trying to invest in our facilities. You know, we have 5 schools. Each of those schools you have to continue to keep up and maintain, and we haven't invested in those schools in the past the way that we should have, and so it's kind of catching up to us, and we need to make significant investments in our schools' facilities, and we have been. I think probably there's been at least 4 referendums passed since I've been here, since 2015, but each one of those comes with a price tag. Those are local bonds. We have to pay those, the principal payments on those bonds. For example, just recently, the most recent bond was $500,000 that was impacting this fiscal year coming up in FY25. And so those are pretty significant increases in cost. And then the other big one, I would say, you know, again, there's lots of other things that I could go on forever about, but I think the other big one is really just maintaining the high quality staff that we have. 80% of our budget is people. You want to invest in high quality education. You need to invest in the people that provide that. And we're not the top of the market. We don't pay the top salaries in the area. We also don't pay the lowest salaries in the area. We try to maintain that middle ground with other Cumberland County schools. And that investment, it takes quite a bit to maintain. You know, when you're talking about salaries for teachers and support staff and bus drivers and everybody else that's involved, you know, I think that investment is increasingly difficult to maintain because the costs continually increase. So things like health insurance, for example. I don't think I've experienced a year where health insurance costs didn't go up in one shape or form. So I think those kinds of things are probably the biggest increases in expenditures that we are seeing.
When you talk about special education, you say you've gone from 300 and some odd students to over 500. So that could be as much as a 67% increase in the past 9 years.
Yeah.
Why has that happened? What's happened to your enrollment overall in that 9 years?
Well,
And are we identifying more students in special education than we used to?
I think we are, certainly the percentage of population in special education has increased. I think that's happened across the state. Again, it's not unique to Gorham, I don't think. But I think that we are identifying more students in special education. I also think, to be honest with you, a little bit of word has gotten out that we do a nice job with the services that we provide. And so I think that there may be families that sort of vote with their feet in terms of perhaps moving to a community like Gorham for those services. But I think that overall, it's a combination of increased identification rates, increased population. Our overall population over that same time frame has increased, but it's also stabilized over the past 4 or 5 years. We haven't been seeing the huge increases since about 2019 is when we started to stabilize, and so we've not gone down in our enrollments, but we haven't been seeing the spikes in our overall enrollments either. So that percentage of special ed has climbed. I think we were in 2015, we were somewhere around 12%, and now we're up around 15% or so of our total population. And the state is like 17 or 18% at this point in time.
And you talked about facilities. Huge challenge for all of Maine. Not many schools make it onto the state's list each year or every few years. So it always, especially here in Greater Portland, where communities tend to have greater resources compared to the rest of the state, it falls to the local community to fund facilities upgrades and expansions to their schools. I've been involved in 3 different communities: Scarborough, Kennebunk, Yarmouth, over the past 25 years.
Each one of them with local bonds,
Each
pretty
one of them with
significant ones.
local bonds, significant, from 28 to $52 million locally funded. That's the type of thing that you're going to have to take on here in Gorham at some point. Talk a little bit about why. I know a couple of years ago you were looking at a pretty significant high school expansion renovation. That talk, in the community at least, seems to have quieted down a little bit, but I'm sure in your offices it has not.
Yeah, no, it definitely has not. And I think the need for some sort of capital facilities here in Gorham, I think, is pretty clear, especially at the high school. We also have the need at an elementary level as well. We've talked at the school committee level here in Gorham for probably the past 6 or 7 years that we need 2 buildings in the next 20 to 25 years here in Gorham. And so one would be at the high school level, another would be at the elementary level. And when we did that high school project and talked about that at length, I think the initial sticker shock was pretty significant. I think the initial number that was out there, and this was probably 6 years ago now, was like $100 million. And we did get that down, through some work. We got it down to about $72 million, which that same project today would probably cost $126 million or something crazy like that. So we had it down pretty good, but I think the difference in Gorham is that we just don't have the property value that other communities have to support those local, large-scale, sort of local projects. We don't have the ocean front. We don't have the large businesses here in Gorham. We're pretty strong on residential taxes and revenues, but not in the other areas to really support something large like that taking place on the local dime. And so I think the reason it's quieted down is because I think that a lot of people have discovered that the reality is that unless we get state assistance for these kind of major capital projects, the likelihood is high we're not going to be able to do it entirely on our own in a locally funded project.
And is Gorham not currently doing public pre-K for either 3 or 4-year-olds?
We actually just began a public pre-K program this current school year. This was our first year doing that. We currently serve about 62 students in 2 classroom spaces at Narragansett Elementary School. And we also have some private partnerships, which I think is the future of where we're going to go with 4-year-old programming here in Gorham, because I don't have the facilities to do universal. I would need to have classroom space for well over 200 kids to do that. But right now we're servicing about 62 students at Narragansett Elementary School. And that's been a wonderful investment.
Half-day program?
Half-day program, AM, PM, and the intention there is that we don't want put out of business any of our local early childhood providers. They've been incredible partners in our process. What we identified early on is that what we need to do a better job of is getting those CDS services for those families that are most needy. And so we've created those 2 classrooms with a high emphasis on CDS eligible students being served in those spaces. And so we're able to provide more services for those students and families.
Right, and as this conversation is supposed to be about the future of Gorham schools, there's a big consideration, is going to be getting that 4-year-old. It sounds right now like you're serving 4-year-olds.
Yes.
But you're also,
we're
all going to have to serve 3-year-olds as well in the near future.
Yeah, yes, definitely. And I think that one of the, when people ask about, so how maybe can we reduce costs down the road and try to tamp down some different things over time, I think that one of those key ways to do that is to invest in programs that we know are going to give us the highest return in the long run. And early childhood programming, I mean, there's a lot of research out there that, I think it's the last, actually I just checked this the other day, you invest $1 in early childhood programming, you get between $4 and $6 back on return on that investment. And so that's really important.
You have more students reading at grade level by 3rd grade, which is another one of those benchmarks that is a great predictor of graduating on time and heading off to a postgraduate education. So a chance to brag a little bit about Gorham.
Well, I like to
we
brag.
talk about this growth, we talk about people moving here and the challenges of that, but what is it, do you suppose, that makes Gorham so attractive for young families?
Well, I've been here now for 9 years, and I can tell you that I think what attracted me to come here to Gorham is probably very similar to what's currently attracting families to come to Gorham, which is really about the community itself. Gorham has just an incredible community, and you've been here now since 1996. You understand what I'm saying here. I can't tell you the number of times that maybe there was a fire that occurred in a family's home, and then all of a sudden, holy cow, you've got $25,000 in a GoFundMe page, and people are, bringing dinner over, and I mean, it's just incredible to watch this community in action whenever there's a need. It's always been supportive of public schools as well. Even with the challenges that we had last year with the budget processes, that was not. I've seen that kind of a discussion tear a community apart, and that's not what happened in Gorham. Gorham had a civil discourse about its priorities, which turned out very good, I think, at the end. And so it's just a representation of the community itself, and the schools reflect that, to be honest with you. I think our schools are focused on relationships and positive relationships, working with the whole child, not just focusing totally on rigorous academics and those kinds of things. We really focus on the whole child and making sure that that student and the family feel comfortable in our schools, and then understanding their individual needs and then moving them forward from there. So I think that that's one of the things that really helps to define Gorham as our community, and the schools reflect that piece. So that's really incredible stuff.
Yeah, so I think like several communities around Greater Portland, Gorham is sometimes a victim of its own success, bringing in people. And so as you look to the future, I think one of the challenges that you have to think about and talk a little bit about this evening is, how do you continue to maintain that high standard?
Yep.
Meeting people's expectations when you're going to be asked to serve more and more students and a more diverse cross-section of students, most likely, than Gorham has seen in prior decades.
Yeah. Well, talking about that diverse population, I mean, we've seen a significant growth in the diversity of our overall population over the past 9 years. I think when I first got here in 2015, I think we were at a total of, it was 6% maybe of BIPOC type of population, and today we stand at 16%. So we've seen a growth. We've also seen a significant growth in our multilingual family populations, and not just in the numbers. Like, we've gone from like 78 kids somewhere around that area in 2018, I think was the last numbers I remember off the top of my head. We had 78 students in 2018, 2019. We're now at 123. For our multilingual families and children that are being served in our schools for that purpose. And I would tell you that it's not just the numbers, but also the depth of need of those families. Before 2018, with that 78 students, we had a lot of families that had been in the United States for a while. They were well established. They'd had a lot of experience with English in the schools. And so we were getting relatively well-adjusted families in that situation. Today, we're seeing a significant increase of multilingual populations that are coming straight out of Angola and straight out of some of these places that are really high needs areas, and these students have got traumatic experiences. They have absolutely no background in English as a language, and we're having to serve these families, and we're loving it. I mean, it's been wonderful to add the diversity of population in the community of Gorham, but that does place a strain on resources. One thing I do see in Gorham that is different than maybe like the South Portlands or other places in the area is that we don't have a lot of housing stock. So I don't think that we'll see the major increases, like complete ballooning of that population over time. But I think we'll see steady increases in the multilingual population over time. And I think that that's going to, create some strains on resources. Good, positive things for our community, but at the same time, things that will cost money. Yeah.
It is remarkable what some of those students and families have been through. And I think one of the other challenges is to help celebrate those people and those differences that the students bring.
And their cultures and their language.
Right. Sharing their cultures and helping students who maybe have been in Gorham their whole lives have this greater understanding of and regard for the world beyond our little bubble here. So that's it's a, we look at it as both a challenge and a cause for celebration. It is really nice to see that diversity. And in many different areas. You talked about the multilingual, you talked about students of color, but we also see growing diversity socioeconomically. You see growing diversity in the LGBTQIA2S plus community, and all of those things are a cause for celebration, yet at the same time bring their own sets of challenges and a need for awareness.
I mean, that kind of refers back to the original conversation I had with President Edmondson in the first video series around sort of how our schools are different today than they were maybe 10 to 15 to 20 years ago. And I think that's a key aspect of it, and just, focusing in on that diversity and the different challenges that brings. Again, celebration, absolutely, but also, resource development that's maybe different than it has been in the past. But I think in the future that's going to continue. Again, I don't see Gorham having the exponential increases that some of our surrounding communities have had because of our housing stock, but I do see a continual kind of consistent growth in those areas over time. And I see, our special education population, I think, is going to continue to increase over time. And certainly, the residential growth in the community of Gorham, I think, is going to continue to see increases over time.
Right.
So,
So talk a little bit about town policies or practices that that are impacting or could impact in a good way or negatively the challenges that you're facing in the schools.
Yeah, well, I think the first question you asked me a bit ago was some of the cost drivers of our budget, and I think one thing that I didn't talk about, because that was about costs, is actually on the other side of the coin, which is revenue stream. And on the revenue stream for schools, public schools only see really two major revenue streams, right? I mean, it really is just about state subsidy and local taxes. I mean, those are really the two major revenue streams that public schools experience. What I've seen over the past 9 years that I've been here in Gorham is continuous increases in property values here in the community of Gorham of upwards of 8% or more each year for the past 5 years. And that average increase, or that increase each year in property values, has, with the exception of this year, this current year that we're going into, FY25 is the first year since I've been here that we saw an increase in property value that was at the state average. Prior to that, it's always been above the state average. And I mean, it's a hard thing for people to understand the subsidy formula, right? But in simplistic forms, what you need to understand is that as your property value goes up, your state subsidy goes down, right? And so what I'm seeing as a challenge in the future that's going to continue to be a challenge, I think, is that increase in property value that is residential growth. So you're seeing the increases in value, which is going to decrease our state subsidy, but you're also seeing the residential increases in the student population, which is increasing our cost. So that gap continues to grow, and the only thing that fills that gap between state subsidy and the costs, increasing, is local taxpayer expense. That's a challenge. That's a significant challenge. And so what I see in terms of policy level discussion at the town level or community level is really about how do we balance the type of growth that we're experiencing here in Gorham that maybe we can look, try to encourage other types of growth that is not just residential, but also industrial growth, which has, that can also increase your property values, but it doesn't have the impact on the other side of expenditure increases on the school side of things. And so there's give and take in all those areas. There's not any one single thing that I would do. I think there's a multitude of things that need to happen in the community of Gorham to plan for continued growth. I think it just needs to be balanced. You need to look at the residential aspects, and if there's large residential growth coming in, making sure you're thinking about impact fees or thinking about TIFs or those kinds of things, right? If there's large industrial growth that's coming in, think about TIFs as well to maybe hide some of that property value from the state subsidy formula. But also, think about how are you going to increase this balanced growth approach over time. I think that's really, really important, because if you have just one form of growth like residential, which is what Gorham's experienced mostly over the past 20 to 25 years, that's not positive. That's going to cause a lot of increased costs, and you're actually decreasing your revenue stream for schools especially, which is going to have nothing but an impact of increasing taxes every year.
Yeah, it's a real challenge for this community because it's such an attractive place to live.
Yeah.
You can get more house here for the same price than you can get in those coastal communities that you've alluded to earlier. As a citizen, I have read in the local newspaper recently of some potential industrial growth, the battery plant and so forth that are out there. So it seems like our town officials certainly have an eye to
I think they're doing
impacting that in a positive way.
I think they're doing a really good job of thinking about those things. I think they absolutely understand the impact of just residential growth on this community and trying to figure out how do we balance all of that stuff and how do we use the tools that are available. I think the key piece, though, is that is a community-wide conversation. The schools don't control those conversations. My decision-making and the decision-making of the school committee is all around, okay, so what educational program do we provide? What curriculum do we provide? How do we meet the needs of these special education students? Those are the decisions that we're making. We don't make decisions about TIFs, or we don't make decisions about industrial park growth or all those things. That's the town side of things. And I think that for the first time in a while, we're actually seeing those conversations that are cutting across and people seeing sort of that larger picture and how we need to move forward with that particular growth. Great committee is starting up. We've got a committee that has been jointly approved by both the town council and the school committee. We're calling it the Joint Fiscal Sustainability Committee. That group is starting up their first meeting on April 22nd. And the goal of that group is to really think about the long-term, growth and future of our community, and how do we better plan for that fiscal sustainability so that we're sort of growing at the right rates with the right time and not putting as much pressure as we have been on taxpayers for residential taxes.
So stepping away from the financial theme for a minute, talk about some programs, ideas, or practices that are not currently in the Gorham schools that you see being vital or attractive in the future.
Well, the first one that comes to mind actually is the CDS, or the Child Development Services piece, and 3- and 4-year-olds, and providing specialized services to that population of student. I think that we have done a disservice to that population in the Cumberland County area for quite some time. I think that schools are stepping up to try to do the right thing to provide those services to families and children in need. And I think that if we do that appropriately and well as a whole community, that we should see the benefit of that. In other words, that we should see an investment up front and then not so much cost down the road for things like special education or high needs out of district placements and those kinds of things. If we can keep that population of student and their needs in our schools and providing those services in our community and not have to pay the $100,000 price tag that's associated with out-of-district placements, I think that that's a really positive investment and an investment in the future of our community that I really love. And the work that was done here in Gorham, it was probably 3 years ago now that we started. It was called the Little Rams Committee, and then we developed a report that was called Bright Futures for Little Rams around early childhood in the community of Gorham and what we need to do to kind of bolster that work, because one thing that you'll hear if you talk to anybody in the community that has young children is there's not enough childcare. There's a waiting list. There's not enough access to preschool programming. That we need more services in that area for our families in order to be productive citizens. And so I think that that's an area that we can continue to grow and work in. We've done some really great work with our pre-K program, with the Bright Futures for Little Rams. We even have a partnership with Baxter Library. It's called the Little Ram project there at the Baxter Library, where Baxter Library folks, we pay for a librarian to go out into the preschools and the area childcare facilities and share books and stories and different things, literacy kind of stuff with those institutions. That's been really positive. So more we can do in that area is great. I think the more we can do with maker spaces and collaboration and just kind of project-based types of things, I think is very beneficial. Again, our facilities kind of hold us back in that regard pretty significantly, but we've been creative in that. And I think we can take, like for example, our Aspire Gorham program. That's there. It's pretty well instituted in our culture at this point in time. But boy, we could do so much more with partnerships with area businesses in terms of getting our students out into the field. An ultimate vision for us for Gorham High School is that, you know, our students at the junior and senior year, they're not here. Like we want them, but we don't want them in that building. We would love to see them in internships and apprenticeships and job shadowing experiences and co-ops and all those kinds of things, much more so, or dual enrollments at the university, and seeing that's our vision for the high school. Is that, so that could help with the facilities too, then we don't have as many students over there that we have to house all at the same time.
Yeah. You talked about the out-of-district costs when a student is placed by an IEP team in a special purpose private school.
Yep.
The expense could be $100,000 a year.
It could be expensive.
It could be twice that if it's residential and so
Yep.
forth. At one point, there was a Sebago Alliance school.
Yes.
This was before your time that it was developed and before your time here, I think, that it...
The year I came in
you
was the
came,
year it
okay.
ended. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you remember what the challenges were about that?
Yes.
Because it did appear as though, in theory, that would be a cost-effective way
Yes.
to provide services to these students rather than being placed one at a time in a $100,000 a year school.
Yep.
You could educate 6, 8, 10 of them
Yeah.
and maybe spend $300,000 on staffing.
Yeah. Yeah, what the downfall of that school was, and I think there are lessons that we can learn from that too, that absolutely can be translated into the future. But the downfall of that particular school was the change that occurred with Medicaid billing. And if you remember, right around that time frame, it was only maybe a year prior to that they had significantly adjusted how you can bill for main care services. And again, for those of you watching, main care services are health-related services that schools provide to students. Oftentimes things like speech, OT, PT, social worker services, those can be like health-related services that you can bill main care for and receive revenue back. It used to be that there was a pretty significant funding stream associated with that you could bring in a good amount of revenue that would offset those costs. When they changed the rules on how to bill for main care, it really significantly adjusted the manner in which they could do it with the Sebago Alliance School. They didn't allow a regional billing. You had to have a fiscal agent school do that and then parse it out amongst the others. And with the changes in rules that occurred at that point in time, they just didn't have the capacity to do it. It became an administrative nightmare, and they weren't able to bring in the revenue that would offset the costs the way that they had been doing. And so that was really the downfall of the Sebago Alliance School, really. Now, you know, project that forward, what can we look at now? We don't have the Sebago Education Alliance anymore. We have the Greater Sebago Education Alliance, which is a regional service center that Gorham is a member of and participates in. And that is an institution that could be utilized for those same kinds of shared services agreements. And the adjustments to the main care billing and how that are beginning to loosen up a little bit more than they had been. That's going to allow for regional billing types of hubs to exist. And so I think that the opportunity for shared services in those areas would probably be something that is absolutely in our future and something we should definitely be looking at as a way to reduce costs and even increase our revenue streams across the board.
Right. Yeah. Still won't meet the needs of every student who
No.
is likely to need an out-of-district placement,
No.
but it could for a significant number of them.
Yes, yeah. It's one way out of a myriad of ways that we need to look at addressing our future needs. Yep. Yeah.
And what's your pitch to bring staff here? Because this is a big challenge.
Pipelines
We've seen
and recruitment.
significant drops
Yeah.
in the applicant pool. I was sharing with somebody just earlier today. in our district, we keep track, as I'm sure you do as well, of how many people apply for each position and
Oh.
so forth.
Yeah.
I was looking at a teacher's personnel file from when they were hired, because they're now leaving the district,
Yeah.
retiring. They were hired with us in 1998, so
Yeah.
25, 26 years ago,
Yeah.
as an elementary teacher. 198 applicants
Mm-hmm.
for the position. This year, for our elementary teaching positions, we have 25, 28, and that's high, and
Yep.
that is in a high-paying district,
Yeah, Yarmouth's at
suburb
the
of-
top of the food chain there in that
suburb
yeah.
of Portland. And so, how do you attract staff, first of all, so that you have a good applicant pool? And secondly, the thing that we're all being challenged to do as well is to diversify our staff.
Yeah.
So how do we attract staff, and how do we diversify our staff in an environment where applicant pools are a fourth, possibly, of what they used to be, and especially at the leadership level,
Oh, goodness
where
gracious. Yeah.
school principal applications have gone from, say, 24. I saw a few applicant pools of a couple of dozen 15, 18 years ago, and now we're lucky to have a half dozen.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me tell you that what you just described there is exactly what's happening in Gorham as well. I mean, we're seeing the same things in terms of
Right.
numbers of applicants and the pools that we have to draw from. In answer, I guess I'll be global first about my answer to how we do that, and then I'll get a little bit more detail. But in answer to that question, I'm going to go back to community again. Community is what brings people to Gorham. It's what brings people in. It's what makes them want to stay in the community as well. So a strong community, a vibrant community that has good public schools, but also has really great, neighborhoods and library services and places to go for recreation. All of these things combined is what makes Gorham the strong community that it is. It's not just the schools, and it's not just, the recreation department, and it's not just this or USM on the hill, right? It's really about the whole community and how we work together and how we bring people in. So that, to me, is the biggest recruitment tool that we have. We can sell our community. We can say, this is a great place to live, and I'm not lying. Look at that, So it really is a good tool. Now, specifically, though, you have to get down, to the details here. I think the first thing is that we need to be more creative in how we bring people into the pipeline. Things like the apprenticeship program, working with USM, our neighbors on the hill. That's a wonderful resource that we need to continue to tap into to bring in and strengthen that pipeline for our teachers. And you don't do that by bringing in teachers, you do that by bringing in educational technicians and then providing them a way to go up through the system at a relatively barrier-free methodology to get to that teaching certification. And then once they're there, they stay. Again, once folks come in, it's the community that keeps them. Hopefully the community draws them, but once they're here, the community is what keeps them. Because that's what you want when you're kind of young and in that early part of your lifestyle. You want a community that you can hang out with and socialize with and be all those things with. So I think that's a big piece. So being more creative in how you bring people in. I think also in terms of specifically in terms of diversifying our workforce, again, community is a big piece of that, because if we have a more diverse community, then people are going to want to move in, have more like-minded conversations, but also more diverse conversations in a community. But I also think that we need to be purposeful in how we reach out to folks of diverse backgrounds in the hiring process. Making sure that we're doing a better job of advertising our positions in different ways, getting the word out about our openings in different ways, and then being more open in the processes that we use to hire folks of more diverse populations. Again, at the end of the day, the most qualified candidate needs to get the job, and that is absolutely always the case. But can we think differently about how we bring people into the first round of interviews, or how we screen our written applications that might be different, that would allow for more diverse applicants to make it up through the system? I think those are big things. And then once they're here, how do you retain them? It's not just about recruitment, it's about retaining a diverse population as well. And I think that's, again, goes back to community and supports and the training and professional development that we can provide for them. When it comes to leadership, again, pipelines. You've got to bring the pipeline in at the local level. Gorham, right now, we're pretty darn good in terms of that internal pipeline. Now, I could see that over time, though, degrading just because of the absolute scarcity of applicants wanting to get into leadership at the educational level. But right now, I think we do a really nice job of sort of building in teacher leaders that then want to become, the assistant principals or the principals and then want to come up through the systems in that way. My fear is actually that we've done too good of a job and they're all going to get sucked up by all these other districts in our area that want to have these leadership folks in place or need to have them. And so that's a concern that I have as well. But pipelines is huge, and being creative about how you strengthen them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're active at the state level. You and I serve on a couple of committees together.
A few.
You're also very active at the national level. What do you hear from your colleagues around the country that that make you feel blessed to be working in Gorham, Maine, but also things that you that you find you have in common, regardless of where they're coming from? Large districts in Nevada or small districts in northern Vermont. What do you hear out there?
Yeah, well, some of the things, first of all, I always feel blessed going to any of the national meetings that I go to and thinking about the community I serve here in Gorham, and again, going back to that strength of community and the fact that I know that I have a strong community that I work with, and that the community, even though we have challenges with things like tax bases and different things like that, the community is supportive of its public schools. This community understands the importance of its public schools and the investment that is in our future. And so I feel really blessed to be in that situation when I go and work with colleagues from across the nation, because that isn't always the case. No. And so I think that that's a really important piece to say in terms of a celebration. In terms of common challenges that are being faced across the nation, I think the pipeline is a big one. Teacher pipeline in general is huge across the country. I think that also the scarcity of resources. Again, when you think about public schools, there really is only two funding streams, and that is their state foundation, the subsidy formula, whatever that state's formula is, and Maine is different than many. And I'm blessed, again, when you go out and you look at other funding formulas from across the country, Maine's formula is a very solid formula. We can complain all we want to about some of the things that are part of it, but when you compare it to others across the country, we're in a good place. We have that kind of statewide support, but that's one stream, and the only other stream is taxes. And so costs don't go down. I haven't been in a school system a year that the costs have gone down. Have you ever been in?
No.
No. Okay. And that's because you operate a system with the least amount of resources that you need to operate the programs. And as as programs grow, the needs grow, and therefore the costs kind of continue to go up. It's not rocket science. It's kind of what happens. But we don't have the revenue streams to offset it. And so the only place that it can go is taxes. And so the squeeze that public schools are feeling across the country in that area is no different. It's the same across the country, that people are kind of feeling that piece. Now you have more affluent communities that maybe are willing to pitch in a little bit more, and you have less affluent communities that maybe don't have that to pitch in, and so there's inequities that exist as a result. But I think that pressure is there across the country in terms of how do you fund public schools with increasing costs.
Yeah, and it's interesting to speak with superintendents in other parts of the country about the legislation that's being passed in their states.
Yeah.
And compare that with what's happening here in Maine. And again, I feel blessed.
Yep.
I'm glad that we live here in Maine. However, we do have a high number of legislators, one of the highest per capita list of legislators in the country.
Yeah, in terms of sheer numbers.
So it seems as though everybody knows a local legislator, and they're able to maybe request a constituent bill be put before the legislature. We have some challenges there right now with potential increased costs for
don't get me started.
Salaries, for paid time off.
Yes, significant.
A lot of unfunded mandates being considered right now.
Yeah.
And right now we're also working at trying to help the legislature understand that we need more controls in place for marijuana distribution than fewer controls because of the challenges our students are facing.
Correct. That we have to deal with as a result of all those things. Yeah. I think, that's one of the, if you were to look into the future, I think we are one of the things that local legislators could do that would be the best darn thing on the face of the planet is not feel as though they have to bring legislation to the new session. You know, sometimes just keeping things as is and not adding things is not a bad thing. I always joked around with my husband. In fact, I think I just made this joke the other day with my husband that, you know, I think that there ought to be a bill that if you pass a bill, you have to remove 2 from the from the existing list. But you know, in regards to that, I mean, just recently you rattled off a couple, but right off the bat here, there's the minimum teacher salary bill that's coming through. That looks at a $50,000 minimum salary across the state, which doesn't sound all that bad in the Cumberland County area, but keep in mind that that's minimum salary for the state. So that's Washington County, it has to be at 50, which means we have to be above that, right, in order to be competitive and remain competitive. So there's a significant cost associated with that. Another bill that I think I'm going to do an interview about this on Thursday with somebody from the news media around the support staff bill, the one that creates 150% of minimum wage for educational technicians, and then 125% of minimum wage for, you know, bus drivers and other support staff. And there is a cost associated with that, a significant one. I think I did a quick estimate, and it was up around $800,000 for Gorham of a cost that would be associated with that bill if it's passed. Again, do our support staff need to be paid more? They absolutely do need to be paid more. I mean, I don't think anybody would argue with that. But when you're in a public school system and your only 2 revenue streams are state subsidy and tax dollars, well, guess what's going to happen when you increase those costs? It's going to be passed off to the taxpayer. It has to be.
Yeah.
So those are significant bills that have really impact on how we move forward. And, you know, those are big ones that people can see. But there's a lot of little ones out there that people don't see either, that have absolute cost associated with them. You know, like the paid family leave bill that was passed a couple of years ago, or the Family Medical Leave Act that was passed a year ago. I mean, all of those bills, when you're an employer, which we are, and you have to, you know, provide these things minimally because the statute requires it, there's cost. And again, public schools only have 2 revenue streams. And if the state subsidy is not keeping up, which it is not, if you do an inflationary calculation for EPS, it doesn't keep up with actual costs. But that means that the taxpayers are left to kind of pick up the difference.
And again, looking at the future, if we continue to lower the constraints that we have on marijuana distribution, access for kids, and we're already seeing, as you know, the Myos survey of our students in the state of Maine, showing higher and higher levels of anxiety, depression, mental health needs, suicidal ideation, and there is a direct link between early drug use and addiction and anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So here's another cost that's going to come our way. Unfortunately, it's a cost that's going to come students' ways, the students' way in the future, because they're going to be ones dealing with mental illness at higher levels than we're seeing even now. And communities are going to have to step up and provide greater resources in the schools to help those students and their families.
Right. I think another major difference, you know, and I talked about this with Jackie in the first video series, again, 10 to 15 to 20 years ago, I think that you saw more community-based services that were helping with things like that. But boy, I think it's gotten down to public schools really are sort of the last bastion standing for some of these really important services that need to be provided for prevention and health-related services. And schools are really kind of it at this point in time for some of those community-based services. And so that places a lot of pressure on public schools now and in the future as we move forward. I think that, the more that we could, perhaps partner with nonprofits or other organizations in the community to sort of kind of divert some of those responsibilities a little bit and or partner with them to operate better program or stronger programs, I think that might be better too, because right now so much emphasis is placed on public schools providing those services. It just does nothing but increase costs as well. And you got to worry about the needs of, we're talking about costs. We're both superintendents. We live in dollar figures, right? But at the end of the day, too, it's about our kids and what they need, and providing what they need. Because that is an investment in our future. If we don't invest there, it hits us down the road in much bigger numbers. So,
what are you most excited about?
What am I most excited about? I am most excited about just this community. The potential for the future is unlimited as far as I'm concerned. You know, I think the town has got a much better handle on how we need to grow in a balanced approach in multiple different ways. And I think they're really doing a good job of trying to figure out how that looks, what that looks like in Gorham. And I'm excited about the potential, you know, of what this community can bring. The resources that we have are incredible. We have a strong, strong community. I can't say that more. I mean, I've said it probably 20 times already, and I'm going to continue to say it. But we have such a strong community. We've got great partners with USM in our backyard. We've got SMCC just down the road. We have so many things that we can do, and strong people that are willing to sort of take risks and experiment with things, like the Aspire Gorham program and how that's taken off. We've got strong business partners in this community, you know, the Sean Moody's of the world, the John Smiths, the Shaw Brothers, Grondins. I mean, we've got a lot of resources here in this community that if we can just kind of get people rowing in the same direction, I think the potential is quite large. Yeah.
And it's been that way for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've enjoyed living here for 26 years now. As I said, students, my kids went through the schools and have done well. We moved out of town for 1 year while we were building a new home in Gorham. And when we moved back, my son said, "Dad, we're Gorham people. We don't need to live anywhere else."
That's right. Good for him.
Of course, he now lives in San Diego, where the sun shines.
That's right.
364
surfing all the time.
days a
Yes.
year, you know, and surfing. So, but you did a great job.
Thank
The
you.
Gorham Schools did a great job with our kids, and
Yeah.
I know that you do a great job meeting the needs for the vast majority of students in Gorham. So
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew, for being willing to join and have this conversation today. I know that it's not often that two superintendents just get to sit and chat about the future of public
Certainly
schools.
not on camera.
No, gosh, no. So I really appreciate it, so thank you very much.